Welcome to Talking Markets, and this is General Election Special Live. The UK, of course. I'm Michael Wilson, and I'm joined by my good friend David Buick.
Greetings, kind sir.
And I'm very pleased to say that joining us on this special podcast is Helen Thomas. Huge CV, obviously, one of Britain's most respected business commentators and financial commentators, I may say so. Also the founder of your website, Blonde Money. How is it for you so far?
Well,
are you looking like most people as a major landslide?
Can I just clip in?
Yes.
Congratulations for being the only person
to
flag up the July election.
Yeah,
wow.
July, yes.
Well
well,
done.
thank you very much for that. It's always nicer if someone else says it, rather than us. But yes, we were looking at July the 4th as the election date. And
why?
Because time was making things worse for the Prime Minister, not better. Not just in terms of enemies in his own party, but also actually the data, people don't remember this now in the heat of the campaign, but right when he was about to call it, I think it was the same day, he got inflation data didn't come down as much as expected, and more pertinent to our discussion today, the budget deficit was bigger than expected. So the room for manoeuvre into an election was, he couldn't have done tax cuts into the election, he can merely go in and try and promise them. So basically, yes, the quick way of saying it is they were coming for him, so he had to call the election.
Do you still see this supermajority for Labour?
So I think one thing we need to be clear on about the polling is how consistent it's been. Now, whether it's one of these new fancy MRP polls or the old-fashioned kind, whatever, Labour are clearly streets ahead and have been for such a long time. And the key thing about polling, actually, now here we are today recording this, what are we? It's less than 10 days, isn't it, into the actual election date. They become much more accurate because, it's happening very soon.
It's consistent.
In fact, postal votes have already arrived. Some people have already voted.
Done mine.
You've done yours,
Yep.
Exactly. My partner's done his. I mean, there you go.
Can I ask you about apathy? Can I ask you about tactical voting? And even when I'm hearing extraordinary things like Kent, which you would have thought was about as blue blood as you could get, is likely to go seriously Liberal Democrat. And that strikes me as we've got a lot of and the Tories appear to have given up on anything north of the Trent.
Well, I think that, as we said with those polls, the extent of the Labour lead shows the discontent with the government. And I've been knocking on doors, our team actually knock on doors for lots of different parties, I might add. We are not political, we just want to know what's going to happen. And you're right to pick up the plague on all your houses mood of people being quite fed up with everything. But they're so determined to get this government out that the tactical voting comes into play.
It's anyone but the Tories, isn't it?
It's anyone but the Tories.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing, we should, just for a moment, accept this is quite rational if you think what we've been through, obviously. We were locked up for a couple of years, we had inflation for the first time in 40 years,
decades, yeah.
War on European soil. Of course people are extremely angry and upset and unhappy, and more importantly, want a sensible answer. And the thing at the moment is, they don't think the Tories can provide it, they're not entirely sure Labour or the Lib Dems necessarily have the answer either, but of course they're willing to give them a go.
Farage, we have to touch on that before we get into the business side of things. He is a fantastic mob orator, and they love him to bits. But the depth of his influence, apart from taking millions of votes, can you confirm, or do you know how many seats they're actually going to stand? Is it about 150?
Oh, where they've actually got candidates.
Yeah.
I believe they've got them all throughout England and Wales, haven't they? They've got a lot. They've got a raft of candidates. And I think
more than 150 then?
I believe so, but I think that I think the point about reform now, in a campaign, momentum is what matters. You've got to look like a winner, look like you're getting people on your side. That's working against the government. It's all going the other way. They can't. We could go into all the scandals and disasters that have happened. What Farage did quite well by, jumping in with his candidacy was to energise that and boost them up the polls, and they've continued to do so. Now, what's quite interesting with only 10 days to go is whether that peters out or whether he can get a bit more going. As it stands, around 17, 18, 19% in the polls, which, by the way, is pretty considerable coming from, basically nowhere a few months ago. But it's not going to be enough to get more than even a handful of seats. But of course, it is likely to do enough to stop the Conservatives winning in some places. But I should add, the MRP polls, which are these things that look at constituency by constituency results, Reform, when they're coming second, are often second to the Labour Party. Actually, looking back in 2019, we forget now, but of course the Brexit Party stood, but not in all seats. They stood down against Conservative candidates, but they ran against Labour candidates. Some of the seats in the north, in the alleged red wall, but real, very Burnley places. The Brexit Party, I think, got 10 to 12% of the votes there. So they're not going to damage, I mean, they're going to clock up a lot of votes. But of course the Labour Party is so far ahead in some of those classic Labour seats. And of course so far ahead generally that, Reform can't necessarily, at this level of support, really dent that. But I would make that point because it tends to be thought, oh, Reform are taking votes off Tories, are taking votes off everybody.
I think everybody knows that the search for money will be increased taxation. Can we just explore this working class thing a bit? I work for somebody. He's a working person. You're a working person. Oh, yeah. Just because we don't have a stereotype, whatever that is, of being working class, and yet Labour is not going to punish working people.
Perhaps you should call them blue collar.
Maybe that's a better differentiation. Well, I think they're getting a bit. It's tricky because they've got to build a coalition of voters, haven't they? They've got to try and not frighten this group but play to that group, etc. Of course, that can work for a big election win. Governing is a harder task, as Boris Johnson found out. I mean, that was a coalition of voters, wasn't it, that brought that 2019
But he borrowed
victory.
the votes, really.
He did. But of course, once it's been happening for years that people have become untethered from their tribe of who they would normally vote for. Party membership's been falling. We don't identify in quite the same way these days.
No, we don't.
Doesn't mean something about you.
No.
If you say, oh, I'm a Lib Dem or I'm a Tory or whatever. So I think this untethering is happening everywhere. So therefore, actually, when we sat down here today, we talked about, how long could this Labour government be in power? But if people are volatile, unhappy, they could easily flip another way. We could see, and this is one of my growing pieces of analysis, we're seeing a split in the Conservative Party. I think we will see a split in the Labour Party. And actually, all the more so by virtue of a big majority. Because a chunk of them will say, look, we've waited 14 years, we've got the chance to do the big things, I want to do X. And a group of them could try and force that agenda, and ultimately, even if they don't get what they want, perhaps they'll split off.
You've had, and if the left don't see something for themselves in the first 2 years, they will get restless.
Well, and if we don't get the growth, if people start to feel it's all not going where it should do, and you've got this big majority, what are you going to do with it? I should say, by the way, it's not so much the left as in the Corbynistas, because they have been purged. They've done a good job of doing that. There's actually a group within the Labour Party who are very focused on the environment and climate. Ed Miliband is the most well-known of that sort of group. They could be 100 MPs or more. And if you remember during those Brexit days, there was that group, the Change UK group. I can't remember what they're called now. But we have seen attempts to create a new kind of party. And it all comes from the fact that voters, all of us and all the people watching, are pretty fed up. And they want different answers. They'll say, this is the answer, that's the answer. And that's fair enough.
I'd love to carry on this sort of esoteric conversation, but we need to get to business.
Yes.
And
Markets.
With a huge majority, what's your thoughts on equities? Say for a period of a year, and then, even though that's a horrible question with a stability.
No, I think it's absolutely the right one. It's what consumes the people we know in our world of finance, isn't it? I do think there will be a boost, short term, just up to a year at best, by virtue of the fact it will look a very stable government after years of a lot of volatility and tumult. Keir Starmer, people are saying, oh, no support for him now. I tell you what, when you get into number 10, suddenly...
Everybody loves him.
Everybody loves you.
Yep.
Everybody wants to tug at your sleeve and listen to me. And he'll have a lot of power. He'll have a lot of power. So, and it will just look, it will finally look like a government with a plan that's doing something. I think that will reassure investors. I actually think that some of the underweight into UK assets could come out as a result of, there's been a bit of a Brexit discount. There will be a more conciliatory mood music. It probably won't do very much in reality, but let's not forget Keir Starmer will shadow Brexit secretary. He knows the people in Brussels. He could, they've already announced some things they want to do to harmonise more with the EU on certain matters. I just think for outside investors that'll look quite positive.
And how does this confidence, this stability extend to the gilt markets? In other words, international investors and debt. I mean, is that going to get more expensive?
I think initially not much going on in the bond world, if presuming this first budget Rachel Reeves delivers is pretty much in line with her manifesto, because she doesn't want to frighten the horses. You know, if you look at the numbers in the manifestos, it's
so fiscal
small.
Discipline will be there.
It will be there to start with, for sure, because the Liz Truss gilt debacle episode cast a very long shadow, not just over the Conservatives, but also the Labour Party. And she's got to, she's got to win that credibility. In a way, if you like, this election is to get them in, but Rachel Reeves's moment of truth will come in that first budget and the market reaction. So she will not want to frighten the horses at all.
I like Gordon Brown 25 years ago. Whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, after that, you talked, so I think gilts to start with, relatively unmoved. And that'll be what they want. Boring, don't do much. But longer term, if they can't get the growth, she keeps going on about growth. It's funny, actually. She talks about growth in her May's lecture almost as much as Liz Truss talks about growth. But if they can't get it, there will be other changes that need to be made. And that, I think, leads to higher borrowing, and then you will see the gilt market.
As regards to, just to be a little bit specific, Helen, about the equity market, presumably fintech will benefit significantly, and anything to do with some energy. I mean, I would be, as a shareholder of BP and Shell, very, very happy under a Tory or a coalition government. Under Labour, I'm not so sure. Particularly, would you flag up any sectors that you particularly like?
Well, house builders is going to be interesting, because the big thing Rachel Reeves talked about in that May's lecture, MAIS, May's lecture, I would say read it because it gives a good insight what she's about. She says planning reform is the big way to unlock growth in this country. Unlock votes as well, presumably. So I think there'll be quite a bit going on there. Funny you talked about, you said fintech will certainly benefit. Do you know what? Here's the funny thing, isn't it? So Labour want to have an industrial strategy. They're creating great British energy. We don't quite know how it's going to work yet, but
where are they going to find the 7.3 billion from?
Yeah, I mean it's.
Sorry, I have to ask you.
No, you have to, and they've actually quite clearly talked about sort of getting the private sector in. They want to sort of do this public-private combo.
Joint effort.
Can they do it? I mean, they've been making the right noises. As I say, when they get in, everyone wants to do business with them, and presumably business, if it's smart, will try and work with them in some way. But there's a bigger question here, which is, what's that? It's that famous, I think it's Reagan quote. You know, the most frightening thing in the world is the government saying, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help. That's the most frightening thing in the world. Now, that's how it was in the 80s and 90s, you know? You didn't want the government intervening. Now, apparently that's the answer. I don't know, jury's out. We're going to find out, but certainly under a Labour government, you know, they want government to, well, they would say they're not picking winners, but they would say we are trying to incentivise certain sectors, and it's a big question. You know, can the government do that? How's it going to do it? What are these incentives people are going to get?
Growth, one thing. Productivity is sort of growth, but another thing as well in terms of efficiency. It would take a very brave politician, particularly a very brave Labour politician, to get involved in productivity in some of the public services. How on earth do they? They daren't touch the NHS. Oh, no.
But, it's interesting. Wes Streeting, who's the Shadow Health Secretary, has actually said, look, it's only a Labour government that can reform the NHS. I think he's got a bit of a point in that, you know, Conservatives, no go. The NHS don't want to work.
It's about losing with them, isn't it? Yeah.
So that gives some hope, I think. You know that he's right. And what did he says? He's got a great quote about it. He doesn't want it to be a shrine. He wants it to work. You know, he really wants to be pragmatic. Can they do it? Well, I mean, the first thing on their list is to sort out the junior doctors' strike. And, you know, hopefully they can.
And the management, maybe?
Well, I mean, the list of things to do with the NHS is, I mean, even longer than all of our arms put together, isn't it? But productivity in the public sector, it's, I mean, that is, even if you know how to do it, it's a multi-year plan, isn't it? It's very difficult to do. I'm quite heartened, though, with the Labour Party. They've done a lot of detailed work on policy. They work with other policy think tanks, including the Tony Blair Institute. Think about
so not
what
only
you may.
not only resolution, lots of them.
Yeah, and so you know what? They are the kind of people to sit down and, if you've had to, like me, read through all their manifesto and their documents, they're looking at the detail of how to do it. But problem in this day and age is we've already talked about voters are angry. Will they wait? Will they be patient?
Pretty impatient, aren't they?
Will they be patient enough?
I need to ask you one question which is connected with what Michael said, is I haven't gone through with my red biro through the manifesto, Labour's manifesto, ticking things off, but nothing bounced out of the pages to hit me in my very ugly face saying, what are we going to do to attract investment? There's nothing in there at all. And I don't care what anybody says, that if you want growth, without investment, you've got no chance.
And you're talking about, you're saying foreign investors or British or any?
Inward investment.
Right, yeah.
But what I'm asking
We're
you
open
is,
for business.
perhaps I missed it in the manifesto, and I didn't. All I saw was airy-fairy ideas, not we're going to incentivize people with this in terms of taxation, nothing about stamp duty, nothing that would make me say, wow, I need to get involved in the UK, because it's been miles behind for the last 5 to 10 years. The assets are so cheap, I need to get my money in there. Nothing hit me in between the eyes.
I think, yes, you're right, and no, you're wrong in this. I don't like doing two ways. What I'm saying about that is, so the Rachel Reeves plan is, she calls it securenomics, right? So this is the idea. The government is involved, and it will keep people feeling and businesses feel secure enough that they take risks. Now that, by the way, is only one way of looking at it. It's a different way of looking at it to many. Other people would say get the government out of the way. But she would argue that hasn't worked, so you need that. So therefore, yes, it is. I've talked a lot about ideology, but it's important because it's why you're not seeing that message. Because her message would be, well, only by us, bringing in these measures, changing these rules, regulations, partnering with business, strategic state, she calls it, a strategic, not a big state, but a strategic state. Only then will we get the investment. And I can understand your point of view, which is I want to see a big thing emblazoned about, perhaps, I don't know what you're looking for, David, but maybe something like cut taxes on this, or get rid of these regulations, or I don't know.
Bit of both. I mean, basically, stamp duties are nonsense.
Yeah, yes, you said stamp duty, and that's a big one, isn't it? Yeah.
The other thing is that if you're a small, medium-sized enterprise, I would like to see some tax relief in order that they can get their businesses going, which doesn't cost the public sector too much. And I haven't seen this.
No.
And I do understand your contribution in terms of what she wants to try and get, she being Rachel Reeves, wants to try and get across. But nonetheless, it's a bit wishy-washy for me.
I think you're right to pick that up. I think that is correct. And it appears that going that path is not the way they want to go. And the reason I'm couching it a bit like this is I don't want to tell you what I think. It doesn't matter what I think.
Well, it doesn't matter what I think.
Exactly,
no.
exactly. But the reality is, no, they're not going down that path. No.
Fair enough.
And also capital gains tax as well. I mean, that's the other thing which is worrying a lot of people. I mean, particularly on the sale of one's first house, for example, or one's main property.
Yeah, I mean, they've ruled that out, so I think that will be very hard for them to go back on now, on the primary residence. Now, of course, that means it opens up, they might do all sorts on people with second homes, obviously. I mean, look, we've talked about it might be hard to get growth, productivity, things take time. How are they going to get it if they can't spend? So if they want to spend, they've got to balance the books somewhere. I think it will be inevitable to see some sort of tax rises. Capital gains tax is clearly in the sights on equalising it with income tax. For those who don't know that there are different rates, they can bring those into line. I see at the weekend The Guardian was reporting a Labour document on that and on inheritance tax.
Yeah. And savings, maybe?
maybe. I mean, here's the thing: it's all going to be about where they where they draw the line, because everyone in this country has a sense of what somebody rich is. So they might say, okay, well, we're going to do it on houses worth more than £1 million, or on savings of more than £1 million, or whatever. I mean, they can pick a number, and frankly, to a lot of people, it will be big numbers that seem like, well, those are the rich people, and they should pay more. It's all about winning the argument, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is. But I mean, the one thing is that we all know is, to quote Liam Byrne, there ain't no money.
Yes.
And, you know, they've got a manifesto, they've got plans, and they're attaching credence and importance to growth, which you've explained very succinctly. But you also mentioned, in the same wet breath, impatience. Now, to get growth, you're not going to really see that for at least a year.
No.
And you also said we're at 98% of GDP now, borrowings?
Well, debt to GDP is, 100% basically.
So, you know, what do they do between now and growth coming through? And this is a very hard question, unless it's actually spelt out. And if you spell it out, people make a note of the documentation, the date you said it, and why you said it, and they come back and throw it in your face.
I think it's fair to say there will be I genuinely think there'll be a short-term boost from a stable government singing from the same song sheet with a leader, very powerful to start with. So you will get some, probably that'll add 0.2, 0.3 percentage points to growth. Not massive, but it helps. You know, our economy's basically flatlined for the last few years, hasn't it?
Well, definitely.
So I actually think more, and that'll help at the margin. Some of this that they might do where they can tweak planning reform, that could have an immediate impact. They could tweak on the relationship with the EU. Again, maybe another 0.2, 0.3 percentage points. So we're starting to look at maybe half percentage point, a bit more going on growth. That's not to be too much sniffed at when you're at basically zero. It's not great guns though, is it? I actually think then what we need to look at is the US. None of us can ever, really, in the entire world, forget about what's happening in the US. And the US is kind of interesting, isn't it? Because we've got, we've sort of better numbers, but and Nvidia,
they're not great.
But they're not great. But Nvidia's going to the moon. The stock market's. I mean, how long can it last?
Those 5 big companies, though.
I know.
There's not a lot going on.
I know, and it does feel like that Wile E. Coyote moment of him running off the cliff to look down and nothing beneath him. So I kind of think in the run, and of course we've got the Trump question, haven't we? And when he gets in, we'll be looking at tariffs. Protectionism is growing everywhere. We haven't talked about France. That same situation potentially there. All of which could lead to, I think, in sort of towards the end of the year, new year, growth a bit wobblier, volatility in the market wobbling, and a bit of a bumpy period probably there for a year from now.
I so much look forward to talking to you after Rachel Reeves, or before, or during Rachel Reeves' first budget, because that seems to me that is going to underline, I'm sure, a lot of exactly what you've been saying this morning. Don't you agree?
I 100% agree, but just before we draw a line under this super interview, which I'm really enjoying, let's talk about French chaos. Wow. There's a piece in the Times this morning which I found interesting, is there are several economists out there from Bank of America, UBS, and even PIMCO, who believe that the United Kingdom's huge Labour majority will create stability and attract funds to this country which might go elsewhere in Europe. Do you believe that? And one of the things that I wanted to say was that I was shuddering the other day because I believe Mrs. Reeves has got a problem with private equity. Well, not a problem, but she may have a little bit of some juice out of them.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And they are really absolutely fundamental in growth in terms of private enterprise.
So,
sorry.
No, I think that the situation in France, the political volatility in France is only beginning, right? So we've got a first round of the elections, the legislative elections this weekend. 2 weeks later you have the second round. And what you're seeing there is what you're seeing across the Western world, fragmenting to extremes. The far left and the far right are trying to give answers, or rather protest about things that we've talked about, angry voters. And Macron, by calling this election, is crystallising that, and it's going to be a real ruckus. It will be difficult in France. Whoever wins, whatever the outcome, it will be much more politically volatile. And there's going to that, because it's France, you know, it's a core member of the EU, that will have ramifications into Brussels. It could embolden Meloni in Italy. Don't know if you saw her walking out of the EU meeting last week. I thought that was
significant, wasn't it?
very significant. You don't want to upset.
Schultz is not exactly as strong as an ox either, is he?
No. So you've got Germany and France wobbly. We've talked. I have to say, we've talked many times about all of us, you know, of wobbles in the EU. Now here's the thing: they all survive. They patch it up, some sort of sticking plaster fudge, and they sort it out. But you've got to have the crisis first. So I do think this second half of the year onwards, real challenges to the EU status quo. It will reintroduce that sovereign volatility we've seen for years. And actually then the UK will look a bit more of a safe haven. At the same time, you've got rate cuts in the EU, you've got demographic challenges, they're all too old and they can't work. They haven't got the tech titans, you know, sclerotic labour markets, all the usual things. And then you throw in the political issues, and Germany's one to watch as well.
Absolutely.
That coalition might not stick together.
Stick together for 5 minutes now.
So, yeah, I think so, actually. I know you disagree with me, David, but that's I would agree with
I don't
that.
disagree with you at all on that. No.
But we finally, for me anyway, IPOs in London. I mean, there's been a dearth of those. Do you see what you've just been saying as a possibility, a possible chance for the City of London to increase IPOs? And in any case, do we want them?
Well, that's an incredibly important question. Do we want them? Do we want some of the people that want to come and list in this country?
Well, it's a doubt about Sheen now, isn't there? I mean,
well, there is. I mean, it's that's a really interesting question. When we've talked a lot in this chat about encouraging investment, but is it, you know, to any and all comers? I don't know. That's a political answer, I think. In terms of IPOs here, I think what we've just discussed makes the UK marginally more attractive, but what I hear from investors is, at the end of the day, the investors that you want, the people with the money, are in America. They are. And unless something changes here in the UK with our rules or where the money is,
stamp duty and other things
all
like
these
that.
bits and pieces.
Yeah,
I don't see that. So as much as there's a bit more stability, and I know that it was it called Golden Goose? I must admit I don't know these brands, and I'm not trendy enough, but they were going to list in, I think, Milan, and pulled it, citing political concerns over the French election. So I can see a bit of a boost on a relative basis, but I don't think we're going to.
The market's actually, on a global basis, not that much in a mood for IPOs anyway. I mean, it's a
That's
very,
it,
very
exactly.
expensive way of raising capital.
Exactly.
Wherever you live.
Precisely.
But unfortunately, with the very big ones, the United States of America has got access and antennae into so many different
and that's well, I don't
Follow
think any
the
of
money.
us. Yes, follow the money.
Follow the money.
Follow the
Follow the money. And also, Follow Helen. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's been Helen Thomas. That's been a complete pleasure, hasn't it, David?
Until next week. Brilliant. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yes,
Thank you
very much indeed. And that is the end of this very special edition of Talking Markets. We've been focusing on the UK election, courtesy of Helen Thomas. See you again.